Chapter 10. Turning off the engine, Harper hopped out of the car and rushed to open the door before Angela climbed out. That's another thing you have to remember. Don't be so polite to a female. The alphas around here, whether human or cat or wolf, will take that as a weakness and challenge you. From looking at you, you aren't ready to fight one of these seasoned wolves. And don't challenge a human, they carry guns. Is there anything else I should know? Yes. I belong to Nero. He owns this bar. Harper rushed to open the door to the bar and caught himself. Then he remembered what Angela had said to him. He walked in first and she held the door. He stood looking around. The eyes were on him, and he thought it was for obvious reasons. Reasons Angela had gone over with him, and ideas she had yet to disclose. She belonged to the notorious shifter who owned the Rusty Nail, and it lived up to its name. It was more like an old barn without the livestock. It was open with a high ceiling and rafters. Then there were stalls. The kind where they keep horses. When Harper strode in, heads lifted from the stalls. On the floor, wood chips and straw. In the middle of the bar, an open arena, not for dancing, but it looked like someone had made a ring. The kind you see where humans fight. The livestock had been replaced with wolf shifters and cat shifters of all kinds. Mountain lions, panthers who were mostly females. It appeared all the female shifters were cats. Big ones and little ones. And all the male shifters werewolves. And then there are the men. Harper's first thought was to walk out and leave this gruesome bunch of characters, but this was to be his life, and this area was where he would make his home. Like it or not, he had to make it home and get along with the shifters and humans. Nero glanced up when he saw Angela, and his face fell into a sour look. His ears peaked upward at seeing her. She strolled to the bar where Nero stood behind the counter, stocking it with recognizable liquor and some homemade brews. "Who the fuck is that with you?" Nero said, looking at Angela and shooting Harper a menacing glance. "This is Harper. He's one of us," Angela added. "He's not one of us. Not with a name like that, and that simple expression on his face. But we can toughen him up." "What do you mean, toughen me up? I didn't come here to fight anyone. I came here to bring Angela here. I met her." Angela turned to Harper and narrowed her eyes. "Don't say anything more," she whispered, but it wasn't low enough, and Nero heard her. She forgot to warn Harper that Nero forbid her from hunting without him, and he banned her from going near anyone when she was in heat. And she was in heat. But Harper didn't know it. His instincts and smell weren't for felines but humans, and were females. Walking around the counter and standing in front of Angela, his long arms reached for her hair, where he wrapped it around his massive fist, and then he dragged her into the stockroom. When Harper made a move to stop him, 3 large werewolves shifted to block his path. They had learned how to change quickly, which gave them an advantage over Harper. He was still learning. He was learning everything on how to be a werewolf. "You had better mind your own business," barked a large muscular werewolf. He appeared to be part of Nero's pack because they sported the same tattoos. A picture of a skull. "What does that stand for?" Harper questioned, pointing to the skull on the beta's arm. "It signals a dying breed. We're the dead wolves, but before the humans wipe us out, we're going to reap such havoc on them, and anyone that stands in our way. Do you want to join? I don't believe you can settle anything with violence." The werewolves laughed out loud and moved closer to Harper. He could smell their musk. He could hear their hearts beat. He backed away to the edge of the bar. Sitting on both sides of him were the female cats, who appeared more interested in what they were drinking than a werewolf about to be killed. "You haven't understood your reality, have you? You're a werewolf, and you shed blood when you hunt animals and eat them. The only difference of what you were and what you are now is, you're much stronger and more bloodthirsty, and you fuck a lot." He turned to the members of his pack and laughed. Now all the shifters hiding came out for a laugh. He stopped laughing and his eyes narrowed and he furrowed his bushy brow. "This makes you apart from that human you were," the beta said. The beta wolf reached for Harper, grabbed hold of his shirt, and tossed him in the air into the ring as if he was a doll. Harper, feeling threatened, shifted into his second stage. He stood like a man, but his body stronger and more powerful. His hands became large paws with long claws. His fangs like blades. His eyes changed from a cool blue to a glowing sharp golden brown. His teeth elongated and his two incisors sharp and deadly. He hadn't wanted this, but he was thrown into this situation, and now he had to prove himself in front of these shifters. If he didn't, he would never be able to live in this area. And he would never walk out of this bar alive. There wasn't a doubt that the shifters would kill him eventually or run him out of the area. But where could he go? Back to San Francisco or any large or small town. There was no place for a werewolf. There was no place for him but here. Only in the rural areas could he find peace. But he had to prove that he belonged. When Harper landed on his feet, the large werewolf with the muscle-bound neck and arms which hung to his side like two hammers jumped in the ring. They were facing each other down. The shifters hiding in stalls having sex with the werewolves came out to see the cage match. No one will leave until one is dead. Harper heard one werewolf whisper to a bobcat with large breasts. A low groan and snarl crossed the beta wolf's lips. And his wolf was ready to dig into Harper until there was no more Harper. He had the body of a fighter, but he had few scars and bruises anywhere on his body. He had either won without being mauled, or he had never had a fight before, Harper thought. The beta chose him because he wanted to make a name for himself, and what better way to do that than to kill the new wolf in town? Fear wasn't part of Harper's DNA. He had lived and loved clueless. He didn't know he had to fear the beta because he knew he was an alpha in all sense of the word. He knew he could survive anything, and now he would be put to the test. As the two werewolves stood watching and circling each other, the crowd in the Rusty Nail came to the forefront to cheer. Shouting out the werewolf's name, Redlin. Redlin. The stomping of feet and the whistling and jeering at Harper didn't faze him. Today he would test his courage and determination. Today he would know if he could be a werewolf or just cease to exist. Today he would know if he is an actual werewolf. When Redlin made a leap at Harper, he raised his giant paw and swiped him away like Redlin was a bug. Redlin gave a loud bark. When he turned, Harper's sharp claws had torn a hole from his eye to his neck. Harper stood wishing he wouldn't have to do this again. He wanted this to be over. But Redlin came at Harper again, and Harper backed away. Redlin grabbed hold of Harper's shoulder and Harper heard someone shout, "His jugular! His jugular, Redlin, and it's over." Now Harper knew what he had to protect. And what would bring an end to Redlin's aggression. Harper realized Redlin had been hurt because the blood oozed from his face and shoulder. Redlin kept checking his face. He appeared concerned with the amount of blood covering him, then Harper poised ready to kill him. He didn't see Harper's eyes turn to burnished gold. He didn't see that he forced Harper to become a killer. Redlin's breathing became loud, and he clenched his teeth and made another leap for Harper. Harper sidestepped him and pivoted and launched himself on Redlin's back and sunk his teeth into his jugular, ripping a large hole on the side of Redlin's neck. Dropping down on the canvas like a boulder in a lake, Redlin lay there flaying around. Harper had never seen anything like it and didn't want to see this again. He climbed out of the ring in silence and covered with blood. Harper staggered through a crowd of werewolves and werewolves watching at him but not saying a word. They appeared stunned. He stumbled into his truck and staring at nothing, he started the motor and drove away. Nero and Angela had been in the back and hadn't come out for all the shouting, and then the silence. One of the betas knocked on the door to the room they had disappeared into. "What the fuck do you want?" Nero shouted through the moaning and groaning and heavy breathing. "I'm fucking. When I'm finished then I'll be out," he barked through his teeth. Chapter 11. When Harper stumbled out of the Rusty Nail, he was tired and hungry. One more hunt and he would replenish the strength he lost with that fight. He had a kill under his belt, and his face showed the horror and satisfaction of it all. Then it came to him that this was no way to live or die. He couldn't kill werewolves. For his knowledge, there weren't many he knew of. If they continued with this war against each other, there would be none left. There was no going back. From what Harper knew, there was no reversing the process. Maybe that was a good thing to rid the world of werewolves if they behaved like animals, Harper thought. It had been a bad thought. Now he had to concentrate on what to do next. He would go back to San Francisco and meet the woman Michael had suggested would be a good fit for him. He knew after his fight and after killing Redlin, he had changed in his thinking and with his body. Now he became aware that he had to use his instincts and mind to shift quickly. There were too many natural enemies, especially men and other werewolves that were bent on killing him. But no werewolf should kill another half-human and wolf without it getting to him. This was his species now, and there was no way he would reveal this to his bride. Wow. He began thinking in terms of marrying someone. He had to agree that Michael was right. After driving back to his property and hunting an elk, chasing it down and making the kill, this time Harper thought nothing of the kill. He packed the meat into his truck and stopped at a local store to get ice to keep it from spoiling. He would need fresh red meat until he could get back to the town he had planned to name Samseville. As he drove to his home, he used that time to map out everything in his mind. A large ranch with enough rooms for his children. But first a bride for a werewolf. He smiled at the thought because it was ironic. Just recently he had asked Elizabeth to marry him. He was a man then. Thinking and behaving like a man. Young and thinking only one way. Thinking about marriage to a beautiful woman of stature and status in the community. Now that was over and he's a werewolf. Yet his thoughts weren't that much different, but his idea of a wife had changed. Harper's priorities had changed. He needed a woman who would accept him for him with all his insecurities and the hideous aspect of seeing him for himself, the werewolf he had become, a killer who ate the uncooked flesh of animals. He took a full breath and exhaled. That would be a big job for any woman. The thought of a school and hospital for shifters crossed his mind. He needed to make this a reality, but if he couldn't find a human to marry him, he would settle for one of the wercats. They appeared more than ready and eager to mate with him. Driving up to the portico and parking under it, he hopped out at 5 o'clock in the morning. The staff had been congregating in the kitchen when he stood in the doorway with blood on his shirt. They just stared bewildered at the sight before them. "There is a large deer in my truck. Please have it skinned and cleaned by 11 a.m. And he turned, but then he swiveled around and said, "Don't bother to cook the meat. I'm sleeping in until noon." He didn't tell them why he wanted the meat raw, nor did they ask. The staff looked to each other. The one cook, one maid, and one butler never took Harper to be eccentric, but with all his money they suspected that sooner or later he would show some of the tendencies of a spoil-rich kid. When Emily strode out of bed on the first floor, Harper was climbing into his bed. After a bath, she zipped up her uniform. "Why do I have to wear this?" she murmured. "There are 3 people in this house." But she knew why. It was to prevent anyone from mistaking her for anything other than what she was, a maid. Strolling into the kitchen to get her orders, she sat at the table, and the cook handed her a plate of eggs and bacon and toast. "Why do they have me here? There's not that much for me to do." "You're young. It seems like not too much work. If you were old, you wouldn't ask that question. Today you have to clean Mr. Harper's room. He's back," the butler chimed in. Although she had been excited when the offer of marriage came from his lawyer, she thought it only right that she should refuse. He had just jilted Elizabeth, and who knows what he wanted her for, she thought. After meeting with his lawyer, she didn't put much thought into it. Maybe something was wrong with him. Perhaps he didn't have a penis. Maybe he was into deviant sex. Perhaps he would tie her up in one of his rooms, and wouldn't let her out. Who knows what was wrong with rich, handsome men who wanted to marry their maids? Although she thought well of herself, it was still the idea in the back of her mind that something had to be wrong with him. And it was, but she didn't know that, nor did she know what could have him asking his lawyer to find a woman for him. All of this was too suspicious, and she was happy she didn't have to wonder anymore. She would graduate from college and get a job and put this all behind her. "Don't you have something to do?" the old man said, looking at Emily, who had just finished her breakfast. She didn't say anything. She picked up the items she used to dust with and turned and walked away. It would take her all day because the house was so large. She decided to start with the upstairs and then make his bed when she got around to Harper's room. By then he would be up, she thought. As she moved from one room to the next, dusting and changing the covers, she heard loud moaning and thrashing coming from Harper's bedroom. She tried to ignore it, but the clamor and smashing of glass were disturbing. Emily turned the knob, but the door was locked. When she pivoted to walk away, the door opened slightly. "Who's there?" he murmured. All she saw was a pair of gold-colored eyes in the dark. His face covered with a light beard. He stood naked with a powerful chest broad with muscles. Most of him hid behind the door, but from what she saw of him, there was no man as impressive in stature or devilishly handsome as him, Harper Samsa. "I heard a noise and I thought something was wrong." "You are Mr. Samsa?" "Who else would be in my room?" His tone strong and commanding. "I've seen you before, but you never looked like this." "It's my beard?" "That, and I've never seen you naked before." He glanced down and stepped behind the door, leaving a small gap. "I apologize. It will never happen again." And he closed the door. Emily stood staring at the closed door, not knowing what to make of him. When she had dusted every picture and vase throughout the house, it was 1 o'clock. Rushing to her room by way of the kitchen, she burst through the door. "What do we have for dinner?" Sitting at the table with a large piece of red meat on a plate sat Harper. The cook brought over a plate of salad for her. "It has everything you asked for. You'll like it, dear." Emily looked over at Harper, and he got up and walked out without saying anything to her. "What's wrong with Mr. Harper?" "He could be heartbroken over Miss Elizabeth. Ever since he came back from Nevada, he's been acting kind of strange." "You mean it isn't natural for him to walk around naked? And to cry out in his sleep?" "Well, not really crying out, he was groaning and moaning and breaking things." "It could be he's upset over his father dying, and then there's Miss Elizabeth, who is just like that, got herself engaged to a friend of his. Men can't handle what women can handle. They go to pieces fast when they have one little problem or when someone disappoints them. Take his father. He never married after the death of his wife." "What about Harper?" "He was too young to remember her." "That's why there are no pictures with the family together?" "He has no family. Only us. He wanted a large family, but when Miss Elizabeth refused to marry him, I think he just fell apart." Emily smiled because she knew the truth. Harper refused to marry her, but she made it seem like she was in love with someone else. And now she is marrying that someone to get back at Harper. Maybe she should take the lawyer's proposal. But why should she try to ease his broken heart by sacrificing her own? But Harper is a man she could love. He is so handsome and appeared to be needy. She understood needy. She took care of her father all her life, and now she couldn't. By marrying him, she could help her impoverished father, and if the marriage didn't work out, she could leave Harper. But she didn't want to think about that, because she couldn't imagine ever leaving him unless he proved to be a horrible man. Emily walked to her room after her talk with the cook. She called the lawyer's number. "This is Emily Mason. I know who you are and where the call is coming from." "Well, that is a scary thought. Do you always keep checks on the household staff?" "Only the ones who are important to Mr. Samsa." "I've reconsidered your offer." A long pause. "I'm afraid Mr. Samsa isn't interested in you. He's not interested in marrying a virgin." "You didn't ask me if I were a virgin." "I'm not in the habit of asking something that personal." "What made you think I was a virgin?" "Well, are you or aren't you?" Emily didn't want to start off a relationship with a lie, but she thought this could solve her problem with college and with helping her father. She rationalized that she was lying for a good cause. One she will have to deal with in the future. Because after all, what man doesn't want a virgin? "I'm not a virgin." "You will have to prove it." "How am I going to do that?" Emily's voice raised to a shrill tone. "You will have to see his doctor by the 1st of the month. I will make an appointment for you. My secretary will call you with the time and location. If everything works out, then you will have to come in and sign the papers. Mr. Samsa doesn't know it's you, and I won't tell him until you've been certified not a virgin." I have to go to my classes. I don't have time to discuss it with you any longer. And Emily hung up the phone. She dressed in a pair of jeans and white shirt and threw on a dark leather jacket. It was her mother's old jacket she left when she ran from Emily's father. As she was entering the library, she bumped into Stanley going out. She pulled his arm and said, "I have to talk to you, Stanley. This will have to be good or fast. I have a class in 15 minutes. Come on, sit with me." They found a couch in the back near a large open glass wall. "I have a problem. If it's money, I won't have any until the 1st of the month. I don't need money now. I'm working. What I need is for you to break something for me." He glanced at her, curious. "I need you to break," she swallowed hard because she felt sick saying it, and especially to her friend. "I need you to break my hymen," she whispered soft and low. He had to lean in to hear her. "What is that, like a part of you?" "I've heard of that before. It's not a finger or a leg, which I would never do, but this hymen, what the fuck is that?"